Watch right now in the Front News Project. The battle for Crimea has begun. Ukrainian scouts are destroying Russian boats and anti-aircraft missile systems. Belgorod region. The Ukrainian Air Force is joining the action. The enemy will have a very hard time. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv and Dnipro, Putin's Russia continues the genocide of Ukrainians. Watch fiery, hot, and blazing footage from the front line right now. The bloody war continues, a war that Vladimir Putin and his pack unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces and the entire Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom continues. Greetings, this is Front News. This is Vladimir Timoshenko with you. In the next 30 minutes, you will get the truth about the war, which our journalists are uncovering from the hottest battle zones. So, are you ready? Then, let's begin. And we start right away with exclusive material. Crimea has trembled once again. Ukrainian scouts are doing their job. In a minute, we will show you unique footage of the destruction of Russian landing boats, as well as the Tor in M2 air defense system. Meanwhile, is the Belgorod region also preparing to welcome the armed forces of Ukraine? Ukrainian military forces have broken through the first line of enemy defense in the Belgorod region and have advanced 3 to 4 kilometers deep. At least that's what the Western press is writing. But what about Putin? Is the Kremlin maniac really starting a new wave of mobilization? A record-breaking spring draft has begun in Russia. According to official information, they plan to mobilize 160,000 Russians. But you understand, this is just the tip of the iceberg. All the details in our report. Masterful work in destroying enemy equipment. Ukrainian scouts in Crimea destroyed 2 Russian landing craft and a Tor M2 anti-aircraft missile system using drones.
The high-speed transport and landing craft of Project Zero Sol 2510 BK-16 were hit. These boats are intended for Special Forces units during operations in the coastal maritime zone. In addition, a patrol boat of Project 03160 Raptor was also hit. This is a series of Russian high-speed patrol boats for the coastal zone. But it should also be noted that in addition to the boats, strikes were carried out on the Tor M2 anti-aircraft missile system of the Russian occupation forces. That is, we can say that the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine continues successful operations in the elimination of both the naval assets of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation and primarily the missile and air defense systems of the Russian occupiers in Crimea.
The Belgorod region also shuddered. There, Ukrainian aviation successfully struck military targets. According to the analysis by deep state analysts, the attacks were carried out in the areas of the settlements of Demidovka and Kondratovka. The General Staff has not yet commented on this information.
This concerns strikes on legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation. The strikes were carried out on the command and control points of the Russian occupation forces, minimizing the possibility of so-called horizontal connections and the organization of active defense.
Additionally, as a result of the drone attack, an ammunition depot of the occupiers, placed by Russian military in an uninhabited apartment building, was blown up. Meanwhile, terrorist Russia continues to strike civilian targets in Ukraine. The enemy once again attacked cities with kamikaze drones. A series of explosions occurred in Odessa, Zaporizhzhia, and Kharkiv.
But in Russia, the night was also restless. The Ministry of Defense of the country of murders reported 97 drones shot down overnight over the Kursk, Rostov, and Belgorod regions. Additionally, Ukrainian forces in the Belgorod region managed to advance 3 to 4 kilometers into enemy territory, breaking through the first line of defense of the Russian army. There is no official confirmation of the information from either the Russian or Ukrainian side yet.
In the Belgorod region, the so-called Surovikin lines have been breached, on which more than $200 million from the federal and local budgets were spent. In addition, the the successful actions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Belgorod region have significantly reduced the activity of Russian troops in the Kursk region. This involves the redeployment of operational reserves from the territory of the Kursk region, an area of active combat, directly to Belgorod. In addition, it should be noted that the Ukrainian Defense Forces have effectively blocked the possibility of transferring operational reserves of Russian troops from the Operational Tactical Group Belgorod, which numbers up to 60,000 personnel.
And the cherry on top, the spring draft has begun in Russia, the largest in the last 14 years. The Kremlin dictator wants to send more than 160,000 people to fight in Ukraine. They will be drafting Russians aged 18 to 30 from April 1st, and this is no joke, until July 15th. Supposedly, these people are not going to be sent to war. But you all understand. However, Russia has fewer reserves and fewer people willing to fight. Therefore, in a few months, the Russian dictator might start another large-scale mobilization.
The Russian Federation is facing a shortage of personnel, both on the direct line of combat contact and during mobilization activities. There is objective control data indicating the coercive nature of mobilization activities, including in Moscow. This refers to the actual busing of Russian Federation citizens, where individuals of conscription age are forcibly detained and sent to military enlistment offices for further service in the armed forces of the occupying country.
Putin does not want peace. Most experts are saying this. Therefore, he needs as much new cannon fodder as possible.
Ukraine is fighting. Ukraine cannot be broken. Ukraine is capable of winning. This is the exact message our country sent to the world after the successful Kyiv operation. This was written on social media by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky. Yes, 3 years ago, even a little more, on April 2nd, 2022, the General Staff officially announced the complete liberation of the Kyiv and Chernihiv regions from Russian invaders. The capture of Kyiv in 3 days, which the enemy dreamed of, failed. Although yes, on certain days the fate of the capital was hanging by a thread, the heroic defense of Kyiv gifted the world 3 hero cities. This title was awarded to Hostomel, Bucha, and Irpin. For more details on the cost of defending the capital of Ukraine, watch the next report from TSN correspondents Dmytro Furda and Karina Vakarev.
Occupation and liberation of the Kyiv region.
They shot in the mouth. They shot in the mouth because it was full of blood. To death. It turns out you can get used to death too.
A month during which the Russians showed their cruelty.
I was lying there and just simply prayed to God that they wouldn't bury me there by the fence. He just went outside from the basement to smoke, and he was shot.
And Ukrainians showed their heroism.
The Pskov division was stationed here.
The Pskov division was stationed here.
It was stationed here, and now it's gone.
Glory to Ukraine.
Russian troops find themselves just 10 to 15 kilometers from the northern border of Kyiv in the first days of the full-scale war. From the Belarusian border to Bucha, the Russians reach in a day. Enemy reinforcement paratroopers are already flying to the military airfield in Hostomel. Some hours become decisive. Our defenders disable the airfield's runway. On the ground, the enemy is met by local defense. The 72nd Brigade, named after the Black Zaporozhians, paratroopers of the 95th and 80th Brigades, as well as other defense forces. Here, the light gas and in some places water, as well as mobile communication, disappear. What is happening these days, no one knows for sure there. One thing becomes clear. The defenders of Kyiv are disrupting the enemy's key plan to take the capital in 3 days and seize government bodies. The village of Lukyanivka in the Kyiv or region. It was in this place that the main battle took place. Do you see the knocked out Russian T-72? The mine sticking out of the road is actually not the biggest problem in Irpin right now.
It is simply impossible to comprehend the full level of horror that people in Bucha had to endure.
At the end of March 2022, elite Russian units are fleeing the capital region as quickly as they advanced a month ago. What the Ukrainian military, journalists, and indeed the whole world will see in the liberated towns is still hard to believe. Irpin, recently a picturesque suburb of Kyiv, is unrecognizable. Houses that were built just 5 to 10 years ago are destroyed. There are simply graves in the yards near playgrounds. Most people, despite the mortal danger, left Irpin. Although during the evacuation, the Russians indiscriminately fired at cars marked with children. Those who stayed are cooking food over a fire and recounting the hell they endured.
I am sick with my husband, and my husband is bedridden. We would have left long ago. We are starving here and living in the cold.
We have 10 cats here.
We have 10 cats here. We recently buried our daughter, and this neighbor died from the blast wave. We buried her there.
On one of the streets, there's a telling scene. Destroyed equipment with the letter V, a damaged BMP, and a boot in a puddle. All that remains of the Russian occupier. Among those who joined the defense forces is the multiple mixed martial arts champion Yaroslav Amosov.
On the first day, we evacuated our relatives and friends and then returned here. We help in any way we can.
On March 25, 2022, the city authorities announced the clearing of Irpin from the enemy. Among the dead were 322 civilians. A few days later, the armed forces of Ukraine liberate the town of Bucha, and the world is even more horrified by what is happening on the European continent in the 21st century. Tortures, rapes, and murders of the defenseless. The bodies of civilians lie throughout the city as if this is not real life but a computer game. The body of this guy was found by the TSN film crew by chance, just by looking into an unfinished building.
They shot him in the mouth.
They shot him in the mouth because his mouth was full of blood. Notice the hands are tied, there are no hands.
Tied hands are the signature of the Russians. The war criminals left the innocent victims no chance of survival. Those they managed to, the people of Bucha buried in a mass grave on the grounds of the St. Andrew I called church in Bucha. According to the latest data from local authorities, 381 people died in Bucha alone. 100 of them due to lack of medical assistance. That is, people were slowly dying in agony.
On our land recently visited.
Concentrated evil visited our land, murderers, rapists, looters. I want every mother of every Russian soldier to see the bodies of the killed people in Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel.
Inhuman conditions could only be endured by displaying superhuman qualities. For example, 14-year-old Sasha in Bucha spent several weeks risking his life and hoping for mercy from the Russians, searching for food and water. In a cold basement hiding from the war, several dozen adults and children were waiting for the teenagers' provisions.
He took bread and butter, there were cookies like that, also based on bread, and some other pastries.
Weren't you afraid that you might be shot?
Of course I was afraid. Who knows what's in their heads? They come with a gun and think they are the most formidable.
March 31st, Bucha returns to Ukrainian control.
The Pskov division was stationed here. It was stationed here like that, and now it's gone. Only arms, legs, and documents remain. Alexei Vladimirovich. His contract has been in place since 2018. He has already completed his contract.
Borodyanka is a town north of Kyiv that the Russians relentlessly shelled with hurricanes and tornadoes. In particular, they fired at the State Emergency Service rescuers who were responding to calls. Capturing Kyiv in 3 days did not work out. The blue and yellow flag once again rises over the liberated cities. People are returning to them. But the war for Ukrainian independence continues to this day.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Well, now it's time to analyze the operational situation. On the blazing Pokrovsky front, the enemy continues its signature military terror. In the Pokrovsky direction, the aggressors carried out 69 assault and offensive actions over the course of the day. The greatest activity of the Russian occupiers is in the areas of the settlements of Pantelemonivka, Sukhaya Balka, Shevchenko, Vodyen II, Yelizavetovka, Luch, Zelenoy, Novi Trud, Kotlino, Udachne, Kotlyarivka, Uspenivka, and Andriivka. The fighting has not subsided in 12 locations so far. Moreover, it was another hellish week for the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The aggressor country's forces, Russia, struck Dnipro with shaheds, resulting in several fires and significant damage in the city. But the most terrifying thing is something else. As a result of this genocide of the Ukrainian people, more than 30 people were injured and 5 civilians were killed. And the very next day, the enemy struck Kryvyi with ballistic missiles. The details of this horror are in the next report by TSN correspondent Anastasia Neverna.
Compared to Saturday morning, it's much cleaner here now. The debris has almost been cleared. Hundreds of broken windows have been covered with plastic and plywood.
We completely cleared this parking area, thoroughly boarded up all the windows, and repaired what we could.
Residents of the affected buildings admit they cannot forget what they went through. Shaheds flew one after another.
I heard it gliding, then such a loud crash. It's indescribable in words. I said, Anya, cover your ears. She covered her ears. The only thing I could do was close my eyes tightly, that's all.
A Shahed hit directly on the roof of the building here, collapsing several upper floors. Olga was hiding in the bathroom while explosions were destroying her home.
If I had been in the kitchen, I would have definitely been hurt because the windows were blown out there and it's small.
On that hellish night, the glow from the fire was over the entire right bank of the Dnipro. Explosions were going off one after another. Simultaneously, fires were burning in 7 different places. A drone hit a well-known hotel and restaurant complex, which had been helping displaced people at the beginning of the war. The fire there was fought all night, but a significant part burned down. About a dozen private houses with blackened walls stand in the city center. The owner of this house died under its ruins. On the neighboring street, people survived, but they were left with nothing from their parental home, built almost 90 years ago. There are practically no walls left.
There was one hit on the house, one in the garage, and one over there, where the pit is. And the car started to burn, explode. In short, well, everything burned down.
Alexander and his wife managed to jump into the basement. This is what saved their lives.
By a miracle, look, just as I was saved. That's how it all is. No money, no documents, nothing.
Fedora's house also couldn't withstand the drone attack. The man has been on the front since the 22nd. He went through captivity, rejoined the army, and now the enemy has destroyed his childhood home.
I think it can no longer be repaired because the structures are all warped. You can see the roof in general.
Debris of enemy metal is scattered along the street.
Shahed engine right here. Here's the piston.
Almost all the windows were blown out in the apartment building next to the private sector. The glass and debris there have been almost completely cleared. But calming down still isn't possible.
We heard the first explosion. We heard the first explosions and immediately gathered, went out into the hallway. But it was already very dangerous to go down. The windows were blown out, glass was scattered around. I hugged the child, dressed her so she would sit calmly, and that's it. That's how we sat in the hallway the whole time.
This attack claimed the lives of 4 people. Out of 28 injured, 8 remain in hospitals. 2 are in serious condition. Utility workers have finished clearing the debris, removing about 70 tons of construction waste. And a Ukrainian flag was installed at the destroyed restaurant.
Well, now we move to the Kharkiv and Kupiansk direction of the front. Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Kharkiv direction, the defense forces repelled 2 assaults by the occupiers in the Volkansk area and towards Kamenka. The Russians attacked the fortifications of Ukrainian defenders 4 times, also in the Kupiansk direction, in the areas of the settlements of Zagrizovo and Novaya Krugliakovka. One clash is still ongoing. And in Kharkiv itself, it's a real horror. A Russian drone Molnia flew into a high-rise building, hitting an apartment on the 8th floor. It is already known that 5 people were injured. A 10-year-old boy and a 65-year-old woman were taken to the hospital with shrapnel wounds. Medical assistance was provided on the spot to 3 more people. And at night, Kharkiv experienced a massive drone attack. In just one district, more than a dozen hits were recorded. 8 people were injured, 3 of them children. More about the terrible consequences will be told and shown by TSN journalist Yulia Boyko.
The enemy attacked the Kolodnogorsky district of the city. Explosions were heard one after another. According to the prosecutor's office, there were between 13 and 15 of them. Around the impact site, there are debris and shattered glass. People managed to hide, but their homes did not survive. We are talking about at least 24 private houses. But the inspection of the premises is still ongoing, so the number may increase. 8 people experienced an acute stress reaction. Among them is an entire family, a couple, a 16-year-old girl, and a 7-year-old boy. According to the prosecutor's office, a 9-month-old baby was also affected.
It started there, The first explosion started there, and then they came one after another. Everyone was in shock. I saw the first two. It was terrifying. One was 10 meters from my house, and the neighbors called immediately at night. I had just arrived and everything blew up. That's all I saw. As a result of the strike, 2 civilian enterprises caught fire. The fire covered an area of 1,500 square meters. The prosecutor's office clarifies the enterprises produced household goods, sleds, and polypropylene. Also, in this building, other enterprises stored materials, which now are just charred remnants. The very little thing in this building, we had a warehouse for construction materials. Well, you see what happened to our warehouse? Almost everything burned down. There are some remnants, but it's very little. The equipment in the part where the fire was very large. There was equipment there. It's a pity. Well, it's war.
Since early morning, utility workers have already started closing broken windows and cleaning the area. Law enforcement officers are also working here, inspecting the streets for evidence of the latest Russian crimes.
For the strike, the enemy used the Geren 2 UAV. Parts of this UAV were found at the site of one of the attacks. Criminal cases have been opened regarding these war crimes.
They shelled. The Russians also shelled the Kharkiv region using aerial bombs and drones. There are destroyed houses in 6 settlements of the region.
Now let's analyze the operational situation on the Lyman and Siversk directions of the front. Let's be honest, this is another sacred goal for Putin and his entourage, and accordingly, the situation here is extremely tense. In the Lyman direction, Russian troops attacked the positions of Ukrainian defenders 18 times near the settlements of Nadia, Torske, Novoyehorivka, Kolodiazi, Yampilivka, and Dibrova over the course of the day. In the area of Novolyubivka, the fighting is still ongoing. In the Siversk direction, the defense forces repelled 5 assault actions by the occupying troops in the areas of Bilohorivka and Verkhnyo-Kamyanske. About 12 countries are already expressing their readiness to join the formation of a military contingent for Ukraine as part of the deployment of deterrence guarantee forces after the end of the war. For example, France proposes to deploy peacekeeping forces along the Dnipro River in central Ukraine. This is reported by the Western press. So, what could an international peacekeeping mission look like, and more importantly, can it even exist? Was investigated by TSN journalist Alina Lesova. Let's watch her analytical report.
The most likely scenarios for deploying peacekeepers in Ukraine are a UN-sanctioned contingent, a European Union peacekeeping mission, or military contingents from individual countries. However, for any option to be implemented, first and foremost, a peace agreement or at least a truce must be reached between the warring parties, experts emphasize. But even under such circumstances, the prospect of a UN-led mission is very uncertain.
Currently, politics is changing almost daily, but as of now, a mandate for direct combat operations is not being discussed. Nor is the deployment along the front line being discussed. There are various options being discussed in large cities, critical infrastructure elements and ports. It might involve certain facilities, but even with military facilities, there are very complex issues.
Moreover, a peacekeeping mission under the UN flag essentially means deploying a mission with the aggressor's permission. Since Russia is one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council and can block deployment options for peacekeepers in Ukraine that are unacceptable to Moscow.
It is obvious that Putin dreams of destroying Ukraine as a state. And this means that his attempts to introduce peacekeeping forces into Ukraine are not entirely in Vladimir Putin's interest. The only argument he understands is the argument of force. We need resources, weapons, ammunition for these weapons, technical equipment and gear, everything that determines the combat power of the Ukrainian army. If we have access to this, and if Putin suffers significantly greater losses on the battlefield, he might be willing to compromise.
In turn, the European forces discussed at the summit between Macron and other European leaders are difficult to call peacekeeping or a peace-supporting contingent. Experts explain, as it involves potential assistance to Ukraine with security. Specifically, the British talked about closing the sky, and this function is not considered a peace-supporting function from the UN's perspective. The latter can guarantee the observance of a ceasefire exclusively on land, as the UN simply does not have the means to ensure the observance of a ceasefire in the air and at sea.
What we are actually talking about and what we want is the presence of our partners. They can be present physically with their troops, they can be present with their equipment. They can be present through training, logistics, intelligence.
Experts generally refrain from making predictions about the possible size of the contingent. However, they say that broad geographical representation could benefit the Ukrainians.
We see that it involves the French. There is also talk now about whether and in what format the Germans will join. Of course, it could be the Scandinavians, as well as the Spaniards and the Portuguese. And let's not forget about Turkey, as Turkey has a powerful army, roughly similar in composition and size to ours in peacetime. Now, of course, we are larger and stronger, but the Turks could do a lot, as they have combat experience. And combat experience is worth a lot right now.
Analysts unanimously agree that there will definitely not be a mission format involving the US or under NATO leadership. At least not without the capitulation of Moscow. With other interstate bilateral agreements, things are also very complicated.
And now it's time to move to the Novopavlovka and Huliaipole front direction. The bloody frenzy of the enemy's army continues here as well. In the Novopavlovka direction, the Russians launched 10 attacks on Ukrainian troop positions. The enemy also attempted to advance towards the settlements of Konstantinopol, Razliv, Dnipro-Enerhaya, Veseloye, and in the Berlatskoye area. 3 skirmishes are still ongoing. In the Huliaipole direction, in the area of the settlements of Privolne and Novoselka, the defense forces successfully repelled 5 enemy attacks. Every day, dozens of drones and aerial bombs fly towards this city. You won't see a single intact high-rise building here anymore. People don't walk the streets here, they dash across them to avoid death. This is all about the city of Huliaipole in the Zaporizhzhia region, which has become a frontline city. How the local residents are trying to care for their ravaged city will be reported by TSN correspondent Kira Ovis.
On the way to Huliaipole, our film crew is greeted by storks. They are returning to their homes in the shattered frontline villages. Even in Huliaipole itself, the nests have already been occupied by birds. Battered and exhausted, but the city is alive. Next to the shattered apartment buildings, early spring flowers are blooming. The streets are damaged, but they are clean. The Russians launch everything they have in their arsenal at Huliaipole. But mostly, it's aerial bombs and drones. The downed metal of drones is found all over the city. Are you going to have a museum here? Will you?
In the city of Huliaipole, we will make a museum of the shells that landed here. The city was heavily bombarded with Khabis for a month. Well, for example, from 4 to 7 Khabis a day.
Before the full-scale war, more than 12,000 people lived in Huliaipole. The fields, hills, and landscapes around are still mesmerizing. Now, about 1,000 residents remain here, but more and more cannot endure and are asking to be evacuated.
We evacuated yesterday. We evacuated yesterday a girl who lived here in Huliaipole. When the airstrikes began, people realized that everything was being shattered to pieces and they needed to leave somewhere. And the pensioners, grandmothers and grandfathers, they began to leave the city of Huliaipole en masse.
Those who remain gather here almost every day in the underground point of resilience to get the latest news, socialize, and have a hot meal. 75-year-old Anatoly is a frequent visitor here.
I come here, it suits me. For lunch I ate and took some cookies. I ate, having taken a cookie.
Besides the kitchen, there are washing machines and dryers here. However, at the moment, there are not many people as they are afraid to come after a recent strike nearby, when the occupiers dropped 2 bombs on one location.
One local woman was injured. We brought her in, provided her with first aid and sent her to Zaporizhzhia. There are fewer people after the strikes near the point. My car was damaged here. Oh look, insert the key, see the ignition light up. I turned the starter, it started, I got in the car and ran.
Now without wheels, the man in a leisurely manner arrives at the specific point on foot to show how he has arranged his life at home. He invites us to his place.
This is my yard.
He repaired the fence and windows 3 times after the strikes. There is no heating, so he warms himself however he can. It's currently 10 degrees in the house.
This is where I sleep. I'm revealing a secret. I'll let you in on a secret. I heat water in a bottle, pour it, and lie down.
Most of his acquaintances have left, but he stays. He says that when this war ends, he wants to wait for it not abroad, but at home. For now, people like him survive in the shattered Huliaipole with the help of police, emergency workers, and volunteers who still bring humanitarian aid here under fire.
All for today. But very soon on the Front News program, there will be new, unique materials from our journalists in the hottest war zones, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.